going on, guys? Back at it again with another video. Today I'm going to be doing cash games again, 25, 50 cent. But I think we're going to be a little deep stack today. So I think I'm going to buy in for like 150 and then just see how it goes.
Come on, let's make this bread.
Let's get it. In this first hand, I'm in the big blind, and I look down at 4 or 5 of clubs, and it is raised from early position and then called by 2 late position players, and it was raised to $1. So I decided to raise to 7 here in the big blind out of position, and all 4 players decide to actually call. So I'm going way out of position to a flop, and that flop comes 4 deuce 10 rainbow, and I think I'm gonna have the best hand here a lot of the time with just a pair, and as well I have a lot of overpairs, so I'm gonna bet my hand and I lead for 11 and everyone folds, so I take down the first pot. In this next hand, I like down a king 10 offsuit in under the gun +1, and I decide to limp and followed by 2 limps, and then a late position player raises to $3. The little blind decides to call, big blind folds, and me and 2 middle position players decide to come along as well and see a flop. Now to a flop of king 8-4, 2 hearts. We decide to lead for 7 actually, and I get called in one spot, which is that lone middle position raiser. And now to a turn of a 5 of clubs. That doesn't really help me much, but I definitely should be charging those straight draws that have gutters or flush draws. But I decided to check back just in case I'm up against a better king. And now in the river is the 5 of spades. He decides to lead for 12. I call and he says he has an 8, so we take it down with a king and a weak kicker. I don't know, I shouldn't really be playing king with a weak kicker, but these kids have wild ranges, so I just got to play any Broadway type cards.
Camera. You're doing good today. Maybe it's the camera.
In this next hand, I decided to start filming on the flop because I didn't want to make it too obvious that I was playing. But we looked down at 6-7 of spades in the cutoff, and the action pre-flop was actually I opened to 3 and got 3-bet by the button, and he got called by 1 limper. So we are 3 ways to a flop of 4 of hearts, ace of spades, deuce of spades, and I decided to check to the pre-flop aggressor or 3-better, and he decides to lead for 5. Now when the original limper folds, I decide to raise this, as I do have a spade draw, and I could definitely have sets and 2 pairs on this type of a board. I mean, he could always have pocket aces for top set, but that's just the risk I'll take with the raise. So I raise to 12, and he decides to call. Now on the turn of the jack of diamonds, I kind of want to see a free card, so I just decide to check this card, as I definitely don't have ace jack, just limping and then raising that type of board. So when he checks this turn back and gives me a free card in the 3 of hearts, I don't really want to see my hand go to showdown, so I decide to lead out here for $10, and he decides to make the fold. So not sure what types of hands he could have there, calling a check raise in the flop, but we get the bluff through. In this next hand, there's an open from under the gun to 250, under the gun +1 calls, and a late position player calls as well. And I look down at pocket 10s in the big blind, and I decide to put in a squeeze play here and raise to 14. and the under the gun +1 initial raiser decides to fold, and under the gun +1 calls, or under the gun folds, under the gun +1 calls for 14, and we go to a flop of 8 of clubs, 2 of hearts, 7 of clubs, and seeing all the lower cards, I feel super good about my hand. So I decided to down bet to about 1/4 pot to $7, and with this $7 raise, he decides to go all in for his remaining about 19 total, and I don't see how I could fold an overpair to this player specifically. And I mean, it's just such low stakes that I'm never folding an overpair, and I put in the call. The runout goes brick, brick, and we lose about an $80 pot to pocket jacks. In this next hand, we look down at Queen 9 offsuit in the cutoff, and there's rather some interesting dynamics in this hand because a jack is exposed, or jack of hearts is exposed, and my friend actually decides to keep this jack in his hand throughout the hand. So there is an open from under the gun to 250 and under the gun +1, hijack, myself, the button, and the big blind all decide to make the call for 250, and we go 6 ways to a flop of the Queen Jack 9 rainbow, and so we flop a 2 pair, and all in all I think this is a great flop because I know he has a jack and I could get a lot of value. So when it is checked to under the gun +1, he decides to raise to $4, and knowing he has a jack and likely not pocket jacks because he would have re-raised pre, I decide to raise him to $14 on this flop with my 2 pair, and that of which he decides to make the call. And now going to a turn which is the 6 of diamonds, he decides to lead out here for $25, and this raise doesn't really make much sense, as why would he have jack 6 here calling pre and knowing that I have a jack? But regardless, I don't see much sense in raising this $25 turn bet, and he only really has about 50 behind this. Now pretty much ruling out one of the only hands I'm afraid of in pocket jacks. I mean, I definitely could be afraid of queen jack, but I feel like he would have raised that pre as well. So I almost always have the best hand here. Now when the 6 of diamonds peels off, it's actually a great card because I think I'll get called much lighter by a single pair of jacks, which he pretty much has. And when he decides to check to me in an almost $70 pot, 80 I think, and he only has about 52 behind, I just decided to move all in, and he goes well into the tank, and he actually calls out one of the hands that he thinks I have in queen jack or queen 9, so props to you, Jack, but there's actually some interesting dynamics that go along here at the end as well.
Jack, you have queen jack, you have queen 9, you have queen 9. Like, there. Show me one. There's too much pressure. Show me one and I'll make a call. Huh? Show me one and I'll make a call. Really? It's just even worse.
And after about 5 minutes, I think the longest I've ever seen someone tank, he decides to flick in the call for $52, and I show him the bad news. Sorry, Jack. In this next hand, we're on the button, and we look down at ace 6 offsuit. It is actually limped around to me, and the small blind and big blind, small blind completes, and the big blind checks. So we go 7 ways to a flop, which comes out 5 of spades, king of spades, ace of spades. And on this type of board, I'm not really comfortable with just my top pair, but the cutoff leads out for almost a pot size bet to 325,
and I decided to just call because there's still players left to act behind me, and the big blind also completes the 325. So now to a turn of the Jack of Diamonds. This doesn't really change much unless someone was calling to a gut shot on the flop, but three ways the cutoff decides to lead again for 350, and I'm not really comfortable with the top pair again, weak kicker, so I decided to fold. And good thing I do, because the big blind actually snap raises me to $10, and that shows a lot of strength. So good thing I got away from this one rather cheaply. On to the next hand. In this next hand, I started filming late because I wasn't expecting anything of this hand, but we looked down at ace 8 offsuit, and in this hand I was in the middle position, but so we were 5 ways to a flop, and on this flop of ace of clubs, jack of diamonds, 10 of hearts, it is checked to the cutoff, and he decides to bet $4. And the $4 is called by the under the gun, the other middle position player, and myself with my top pair, because there's still a multitude of draws and these kids are wild. So now to a deuce of heart. Deuce of hearts on the turn. We all decide to check to the cutoff player once again, and now he decides to go for a $7 bet. Now, betting into 4 players on the flop and now still 3 on the turn is rather strong, so I'm putting him on pretty strong hands, but I really don't like folding my ace in this spot. So the middle position calls after the undergun player folds, and I decide to call as well. Now to the river of the deuce of clubs, and me and the other middle position decide to check again to the razor, and now he decides to bet 12 on this river. I don't think Miss Draws would have went for the bluff on 3 streets, especially on this river. So I'm really putting him on Jack 10, and you could actually hear me call it out here. So just a little audio insight.
Beat Jack 10.
Hold it.
In this next hand, we look down at 7-10 offsuit on the button. It was limped from under the gun, middle position, and a late position player. And the little blind folds and the big blind checks. So now we're 5 ways to a flop of 7 of spades, 8 of clubs, or ace of clubs, jack of diamonds. And it's checked to the middle position player, who decides to bet $2. And I call. Everyone else folds. Now this turn is the 7 of clubs, and he continues the aggression with a bet of 350. And I don't really want to give away the strength of my hand just yet, because a raise would just be representing a 7 here. So once again, I decide to just call this turn bet. I could raise, but I don't want him to hero fold something like pocket tens or something. But the river is now the 6 of spades, and I just really don't see him bluffing on this river when he rips it in for 25-75. But trips is just too strong to fold, especially to these types of players that I'm playing with. And with that overbet too, I'm just really not put in a great spot. But I decided to call the 25-75, and sure enough, he was just ripping it in with an ace, and I'm glad I made that tough call. On to the next. Now, in the very next hand, I'm in the hijack, and actually the cutoff, and I looked down at King 10 suited. And when there's one limp to me, I decide to open to $3, and it folds back to the original limper. Dell, shout out to you, Dell. And he decides to make the call. So he blind checks on this flop, and the flop comes King 8-9 rainbow. So I decide to c-bet a little larger than usual. Usually I would down bet on these types of boards, but there is a few draws available, and I also have some backdoor draws that I would like to continue betting on any turn with some diamonds and jacks or queens. And I bet 350 and he calls. Now the turn is the 9 of hearts, and he actually blind checked again. So I'm going to check it back in case I get check raised by a 9, which would be gross. And now the river's a 9 of clubs. So, I mean, I have top boat, so I'm not really scared of much, but he overbets it to 20, and I snap it, and he flips over a king with a lower kicker. Oh, man, I could have stacked him, but good hand, Dell.
Wow, just got done with that session. There's some heaters in this one, but profited about 470. I'll have the exact number here, but yeah, I had some crazy hands today. So let me know what you guys thought. And who my boy Dell?
I came up a little bit too. Come on.
How'd you do? Came up $7.
$7. Come on.
Whatever. Slight day at work. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Post poker session meal right here.
Come on.
These root beer floats. 2 heat. Shout out to my friends that
Pay for our meals.
paid for our meals today. It's greatly appreciated.